The elite guests at tonight's gala think I'm just here to refill their champagne and watch their children. They've spent the evening mocking my uniform, completely unaware that I hold their entire financial futures in my hands. Little do they know, the invisible nanny they're insulting is actually the anonymous founder who owns every patent they use. There is a photograph that has been shared over 40,000 times in the past 18 months. It was taken on a Saturday evening in October at a charity gala in Greenwich, Connecticut. Black tie, candlelight, a crowd of people who collectively manage more wealth than most small nations. In the photograph, a woman is standing near the edge of a grand ballroom in a simple midnight blue dress. She is holding a child's white cardigan over one arm. She is looking slightly down, not at the camera, with an expression that does not know it is being photographed. The person who shared the photograph added a caption, "Spot the help." It was meant to be funny. The people who received it in the private group thought it was. They had absolutely no idea who they were laughing at. Her name is Sarah Cole. She was, at the time that photograph was taken, 3 years into her position as a live-in nanny for the family that hosted the gala. She had worked for them quietly and well, driven their daughter to school on Tuesday mornings, made breakfast in a kitchen that was not her own, and attended that gala specifically to help settle an 8-year-old girl to sleep before the evening got too late. What the people in that ballroom did not know, what the woman who took the photograph did not know, what the hostess herself did not know, is that Sarah Cole had, 12 years prior, co-founded a technology company that was, at the moment that photograph was taken, the subject of a $340 million acquisition attempt by the husband of the woman who employed her, and that the deal could not close without Sarah's approval. By the end of this story, you will understand why Sarah Cole was in that house. You will understand what she was watching, and you will understand why, on the evening that photograph was taken, she had already made a decision that none of the people in that ballroom were prepared for. Sarah Cole did not respond to the Hartwell-Kane acquisition offer for 8 months. On the night of that gala, standing at the edge of a ballroom in a dress that cost less than the flower arrangements on any given table, she had already decided what her answer was going to be. The people who mocked her just did not know it yet, and neither did the man whose firm had been trying to reach her all year. There are 3 questions that are going to drive everything you hear in the next 2 hours. The first, who is S. Cole, and why did one of the most consequential anonymous founders in American technology choose to spend 3 years working as a live-in nanny in the home of the man who was trying to buy her company? Because Sarah Cole was not there by accident, and she was not there out of necessity. She was there because she had decided, after everything she had built and everything she had lost along the way, that she needed to see something clearly before she could make the most important business decision of her life. And you cannot see something clearly from inside a boardroom. You can only see it from a kitchen table. The second question, what happened at the Hartwell Charity Gala on the evening of October 14th? And what did the people who mocked Sarah Cole in that ballroom cost themselves without understanding what they were doing? Because the caption on that photograph, "Spot the help," was not just unkind. It was the kind of casual dismissal that reveals something precise and permanent about the person who makes it. And Sarah Cole, who had spent 3 years studying the people in that house the way she had once studied enterprise software architecture, was paying attention to every detail. She always had been. That was, in fact, the thing that had made her a billionaire. And the third question, which is perhaps the most interesting of all, what does a woman do with power that nobody in the room knows she has? Not the loud, announced power of someone who has walked through the door with their credentials already established, but the quiet, accumulated power of someone who has been in the room for a long time, building a complete picture of the people around her, while those people built a complete and entirely inaccurate picture of her. Sarah Cole had been holding something of enormous value for 3 years. The gala was the night she decided what to do with it, and by the time the evening was over, nothing in that house was ever going to be the same again. The players, a woman who co-founded a $1.9 billion technology company and then deliberately disappeared from the industry that created her. A wealthy Greenwich family who employed her without any idea what they had brought into their home. A charity gala that became, without anyone planning it, the room where everything that had been carefully hidden was finally made visible. A business journalist who had been looking for S. Cole for 2 years and was about to find her in the last place she expected, and a $340 million deal that had been waiting the entire time for one signature. Sarah Cole's signature. This is a story about what people reveal when they believe no one important is watching, and about what it costs them when they find out they were wrong about who was in the room. Sarah Cole was born in 1982 on the east side of Columbus, Ohio, the middle daughter of a school librarian named Margaret Cole and a city bus driver named Gerald Cole. The family lived in a 3-bedroom house on Devonshire Road that had been purchased in 1974, and that Gerald maintained with the determined care of a man who understood the difference between owning something and letting it own you. They were not poor. They were the particular kind of American working class that is always one significant expense away from a different kind of life, and that has learned, across generations, to carry that proximity quietly and without complaint. Sarah grew up understanding the value of things, not because anyone lectured her about it, but because she watched her parents make careful decisions every day and never heard either of them describe those decisions as sacrifice. She was the kind of child who needed to understand how things worked, not just what they did, but the mechanism underneath. She took apart a clock radio at age 9 and had it reassembled by the following afternoon. She took apart the family computer at 11, which was a less recoverable situation, but she had it functional again within 3 days, using a library book and the patience of a person who is not afraid of a problem that requires concentration. Her mother, Margaret, was the head librarian at the Columbus Metropolitan Library branch on Parsons Avenue, and Sarah spent large portions of her childhood in that building, not because she was required to, but because it was the place where everything she wanted to understand was available to her without cost. Margaret Cole noticed what her daughter was drawn to and made sure those things were available. It was Margaret who ordered the programming book that would change the direction of Sarah's life. The book was called Programming Logic and Design, and it arrived at the Parsons Avenue branch when Sarah was 12 years old as part of a curriculum materials order. It was the only copy in the county library system. Sarah checked it out 3 times in a row and filled 3 composition notebooks with notes from its contents. She did not yet have a computer capable of running the programs she was learning to write, but she wrote them anyway, in pencil, in the notebooks, and read them back to herself the way some people read music before they have an instrument to play it on. Her teachers noticed. Her mother noticed. Gerald Cole, who understood almost nothing about computers, but understood everything about his daughter, told her at dinner one evening that she should go to a school that would give her the space to do whatever that thing was that she was doing. She said she was going to. She said it with the particular certainty of a 13-year-old who has not yet learned that some things require more than certainty. It turned out, in Sarah Cole's case, that certainty was most of what was needed. She received a partial scholarship to Ohio State University in 2000 and worked 2 jobs to cover the remainder, a position at the campus bookstore during the academic year, and a data entry role at an insurance company in Columbus every summer. She graduated in 2004 with a degree in computer science and a concentration in enterprise systems, at the precise moment that the post-dot-com technology industry was beginning to reorganize itself around a question that would define the following 2 decades. What should software actually be for? Sarah had an answer. She had been thinking about it for years. The answer, in her formulation, was this. Software should do the thing that people are already doing badly, and it should do it in a way that is so obvious in retrospect that the people using it cannot remember how they managed without it. She had a specific application in mind. She just needed the right place and the right person to build it with. She moved to San Francisco in January of 2005 with $1,100, a laptop that was already 2 years old, and a specific idea about workflow management software that she had been developing in her spare time for the better part of 2 years. San Francisco in 2005 was a city in the middle of deciding what it was going to become, still accessible enough that a 23-year-old with $1,100 could afford a room in the Sunset District and walk to a co-working space in Soma, but already beginning to accumulate the particular momentum of a place that is about to tip into something extraordinary. Sarah found a room, found the co-working space, and began attending networking events with the focused attention of someone who is not there to network, but to find one specific person she has not yet met. She met Marcus Byrne at a product showcase in Soma in March of 2005. He was pitching a project management tool that Sarah thought had the right instinct and entirely the wrong execution. She told him so, directly and in the specific technical language of someone who had been thinking about this problem longer than he had. He did not respond defensively. He asked her to explain what she meant. They ended up at a bar on Mission Street for 3 hours, arguing about enterprise software user experience in a way that both of them would later describe, in separate interviews years apart, as the most genuinely stimulating professional conversation of their lives up to that point. Marcus was from Portland, Oregon, the son of an accountant and a high school English teacher, with an MBA from the University of Oregon and a gift for reading what a client needed before the client could articulate it themselves. He brought a set of skills that Sarah did not have and that she recognized immediately as the complement to the ones she did. ClearPath Technologies was incorporated 6 months later, in September of 2005. Sarah wrote the original product architecture across 12 weeks of work that she later described as the most fully alive she had ever felt professionally. The experience of building something from nothing, watching the logic of a system take shape, understanding intuitively where the weak points were, and reinforcing them before they became problems. Marcus built the client relationships, the pitch deck, and the user research process that told them, with increasing precision, where the product needed to go next. They were not friends in the way that people who spend a lot of time together sometimes become friends. They were something more specific, and in some ways more durable than that. They were professional partners who understood each other's thinking well enough to disagree productively and trust completely. It was a combination that proved, over 11 years, to be nearly unbreakable. The first clients came in 2006, a mid-sized logistics company in Oakland and a regional healthcare network in Sacramento, both of whom were managing project workflows across multiple departments with a combination of spreadsheets, email chains, and the particular kind of institutional memory that lives in the heads of people who have been at an organization for 20 years and will take everything they know with them when they retire. ClearPath replaced that system, not dramatically, not with a product that announced itself as revolutionary, but with something so much more functional than what people were already doing that the transition happened almost without resistance. The healthcare network implemented ClearPath across 11 departments in 4 months. The logistics company told 3 other companies, unprompted. By 2009, they had 40 enterprise clients. By 2012, they had 400. By 2016, ClearPath was essential infrastructure for over 800 Fortune 500 companies, and the company was valued at $1.1 billion. Sarah Cole was 34 years old when ClearPath crossed the billion-dollar threshold. There was a party, Marcus organized it, at a venue in San Francisco's Mission District, with the entire company in attendance and champagne that cost more per bottle than Sarah's first month's rent in the Sunset District. She attended the party. She gave a brief toast that was specific and warm and did not mention the money. She went home at 9:30. She sat at the kitchen table of the apartment she had been living in for 8 years, a 2-bedroom in Noe Valley that she had never gotten around to upgrading, despite having the means to do so several times over, and she drank a cup of tea and looked out the window at the street below. She was not unhappy. She was not particularly happy either. She was aware, with a clarity that surprised her, that something had completed itself, and that whatever came next was going to need to be chosen rather than arrived at by momentum. The burnout arrived the following February, not as a single event, but as the accumulated weight of something that had been building for longer than she had allowed herself to acknowledge. Her mother, Margaret, died on the 2nd of February from a stroke that came without warning. She had been at the library on a Tuesday and gone to the hospital on Wednesday and was gone by Friday morning, with Gerald and Sarah on either side of her, and the particular devastation of a death that did not give anyone time to prepare for it. Sarah took 2 weeks away from ClearPath. She went back at the end of those 2 weeks and sat in a board meeting in which the agenda was a discussion of Series D financing terms, and somewhere in the middle of a slide about dilution ratios, she found that she could not make herself engage with what was in front of her. Not because she was stupid or unprepared or grieving in a way that temporarily impaired her function, but because something in her, measuring the distance between what mattered and what she was currently doing, had finally reached a limit she had not known was there. She spoke to Marcus that evening. She told him what she had noticed about herself and what she thought it meant. She said she needed to step away from the operational role, not permanently, not with any fixed timeline, but in a real and structural way, not as a sabbatical that everyone understood she would return from in 6 weeks. Marcus listened. He had been watching it happen for months, he said, and he had been waiting for her to name it because he knew that Sarah Cole would name it in her own time, and that nothing he could say before that time would be either welcome or useful. They spent 3 evenings restructuring her role. She retained her equity, 22.4% of outstanding shares. She retained board veto rights over any acquisition or structural decision above $50 million, a clause that had been in the shareholders' agreement since 2006 and that had never been exercised. She transferred day-to-day operational control to Marcus entirely. She was, on paper, still the most powerful individual shareholder in ClearPath Technologies. In practice, she was gone. She spent a year in Columbus, in the house on Devonshire Road where Gerald still lived, doing very little in the way that people who have been productive for a very long time do very little, with a restlessness that they manage through small disciplines rather than resolve. She ran in the mornings. She cooked dinner for her father most evenings. She read the books she had been intending to read for a decade and discovered that most of them were exactly as good as she had hoped. She drove Gerald to his doctor's appointments and sat in the waiting room and did not check her phone for work-related messages, which was something she had not done in 11 years. She was 36 years old and worth considerably more money than she had ever needed, and she was genuinely uncertain, for the first time in her adult life, about what any of it was for. The uncertainty did not frighten her. It seemed to her like honest information about a state that required attention. It was Gerald who suggested the nanny position. Not as a career move and not as a financial necessity, Gerald Cole understood his daughter's financial situation with enough precision to know that she was not going to need to work for money for the rest of her life. He suggested it because he knew her. He knew that what she needed was to be necessary to someone specific and small, in a way that had nothing to do with market share or quarterly metrics. A friend of a colleague was connected to a family in Greenwich, Connecticut, the Hartwells, who were looking for a live-in nanny for their younger daughter. Gerald mentioned it without pressure, the way he mentioned most things he thought were worth considering. Sarah thought about it for 2 weeks. Then she applied. She applied under her own name, because Sarah Cole is one of the most common names in the country and had never been publicly associated with ClearPath in any photograph or article. She listed genuine references. She answered every question Victoria Hartwell asked in the initial conversation with the calm, direct accuracy of someone who has spent her career building things that work correctly. She was offered the position the following week. She accepted it the following day. Victoria Hartwell was 49 years old, a Wellesley graduate from an old Connecticut family, and a woman who moved through her social world with the practiced ease of someone who had been performing competence in formal settings since childhood. She was not an unkind woman. She genuinely loved her children, and she engaged, with real commitment, in the charitable work that occupied much of her calendar. But she had grown up in a world that sorted people into categories early and efficiently, and she had never developed the habit of questioning whether the categories were correct. She hired Sarah Cole because Sarah seemed warm and competent and calm in the kitchen interview, and because Victoria's domestic staff coordinator had recommended her, and because Lily, then 6 years old, already perceptive in the way of children who are watching adults more carefully than adults realize, had looked at Sarah across the kitchen table and said, without preamble, "She seems nice." Victoria trusted Lily's instincts in these matters more than she trusted most other things. She offered Sarah the position that afternoon. James Hartwell was 53 years old and a senior managing partner at Hartwell Kane Private Equity, a firm he had built over 30 years from a 2-person operation in a rented Greenwich office into a $4.2 billion enterprise with 47 portfolio companies and a reputation for identifying acquisition targets that other firms had undervalued. He was good at his work in the specific way of someone who has made the same kind of decision thousands of times and has developed a near-intuitive understanding of when a number is right. He was not a cruel man, and he was not a dishonest one. He had the particular blind spots of his background, a tendency to underestimate people who did not present themselves in the language he recognized as the language of seriousness, a confidence in his own assessment of situations that occasionally crossed the line from useful into absolute. These were not unusual blind spots. They were simply consequential ones, in the specific circumstances of this particular story. For the 3 years that Sarah Cole worked in the Hartwell house, James Hartwell came home to dinner at 7:30 most evenings and talked about his work with the comfortable openness of a man who does not consider the people who work in his home to be part of his professional audience. He talked about deals in progress, about partners he found difficult, about the target company that his team had been circling for the better part of 2 years, a software firm with extraordinary metrics and an ownership structure that kept frustrating the acquisition process. He talked about Cole, the anonymous co-founder of that software firm, with a combination of admiration and exasperation. Admiration for what the company had built, exasperation at the silence from the equity holder who had to sign off on any deal above $50 million. He said once, at the dinner table, that he was beginning to wonder if Cole was a ghost. Sarah was clearing the dishes at that moment. She did not look up. Before we go any further into what happened in that house, and what happened at the gala, and what happened in the weeks that followed, before we get to the part that 40,000 people shared, and the part that ran on the cover of a business magazine, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you, and do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because what Sarah Cole did with 3 years inside that house, and what she did with the information she gathered there, is one of the most methodical and quietly extraordinary things any person in this story could have anticipated. And nobody anticipated it. The Hartwell Charity Gala for Children's Education was held every October at the Hartwell estate in Greenwich, a tradition Victoria had maintained for 11 consecutive years, with the kind of organizational commitment that comes from genuinely believing in the cause and equally genuinely enjoying the execution. The gala raised real money for real programs: computer science education in underfunded public schools, after-school literacy initiatives, summer learning programs for children in lower-income districts across Connecticut and New York. Victoria Hartwell cared about these things. It was one of the most uncomplicated truths about her, and it deserves to be stated plainly before everything else that is true about that evening. 230 guests, black tie, a string quartet in the entrance hall, a jazz ensemble on the terrace, a silent auction in the East Wing, and a formal dinner for the inner circle of 40 in the dining room. The estate had been prepared for a month. Nothing about the setup was anything less than perfect. Sarah was present because Lily was present. Victoria had decided, in the way of parents who are managing multiple competing considerations simultaneously, that Lily was now old enough to make a brief appearance at the gala before being settled upstairs for the night. Old enough to say hello to family friends, to move through the room with appropriate composure, to be seen as the kind of child the Hartwell family was raising. It was not an unreasonable decision. Lily was, in fact, exactly that kind of child, composed and observant and genuinely interested in the people she met, which made her pleasant company for adults in a social setting. Sarah's role was to accompany Lily through the early part of the evening and then take her upstairs at 9:30, or whenever the evening's energy became too much for an 8-year-old's attention span, whichever came first. It was a straightforward assignment. Sarah wore a midnight blue dress she had owned for several years. She brought a white cardigan for Lily, in case the ballroom was cold. The evening began as these evenings always begin, with the particular social choreography of people who know each other well enough to have assigned each other roles that they will perform reliably until something unusual occurs to disrupt the pattern. Victoria greeted guests at the entrance hall and moved through the early part of the evening with the fluency of someone running a production they have run many times before. James circulated with the ease of a man who is effective at social occasions and knows it. The guests arrived in the standard progression of these events: the punctual arrivals first, then the fashionably late, then the cluster of people who always arrive together because arriving together is itself a social statement. Lily moved at Sarah's side through the cocktail hour, shaking hands with adults who crouched down to say hello to her, answering questions about school with the polite brevity of a child who has been coached and is applying the coaching correctly. Sarah stood slightly behind and to the left, patient and attentive, the white cardigan over her arm. Eleanor Winthrop arrived at 7:45 with 3 women from her inner circle, all of them in gowns that had been specifically selected for an occasion of exactly this magnitude and formality. Eleanor was 56 years old, the chair of 3 nonprofit boards and the undisputed social authority in the private world of coastal Connecticut's wealthy. She had been married 3 times, educated at Wellesley and then at Oxford, and had lived her entire adult life in rooms where her opinion was the one that established the temperature of the conversation. She was not a stupid woman. She was something more specific and, in some ways, more limiting than stupid. She was a woman who had sorted the world into categories so long ago and had them confirmed so consistently by the environment she inhabited that the act of reconsidering a categorization had become something she was no longer capable of performing naturally. She looked at Sarah Cole near the entrance to the ballroom, and she saw, without any friction or examination, exactly what she expected to see. She said it with the particular ease of someone who believes they are making an observation rather than a judgment. "Is this your nanny, Victoria? How lovely that you let her attend." The words were arranged to sound generous, the "how lovely" positioned as a compliment, the "let her attend" positioned as an act of inclusion. But the structure underneath the arrangement was not generous at all. It was a public categorization delivered in front of witnesses, designed to establish the hierarchy of the room for anyone who had not yet oriented themselves within it. Victoria laughed, the practiced, socially fluid laugh of a woman who wanted to be seen as magnanimous without the risk of actually defending anyone. She said, "Sarah has been with us for 3 years. We simply could not do without her." Eleanor looked at Sarah with the expression of someone who has successfully categorized something and can now set it aside. She did not speak to Sarah directly. She moved on to the next greeting. Lily, standing beside Sarah, looked up at Eleanor Winthrop with the clear, unsentimental gaze of an 8-year-old who has followed the conversation without understanding its mechanisms but has felt its temperature accurately. She reached up and took Sarah's hand. Sarah looked down at her and adjusted the cardigan on her arm with the easy calm of someone who is not particularly interested in what just happened because she has been watching it happen, in various forms, for 3 years, and it no longer has the capacity to surprise her. It had long since ceased to be personally hurtful, in the way that a thing ceases to be hurtful when you have understood it completely. Eleanor Winthrop's remark told Sarah Cole nothing she did not already know about Eleanor Winthrop. What it did was confirm something about the room, about the ease with which the people in it performed their certainties. That was the last data point she needed. She filed it. She adjusted the cardigan. She looked across the ballroom. Across the room, at 9:15, a man in a dark suit walked through the entrance and was given a glass of champagne by a passing attendant and turned to look at the ballroom with the practiced, surveying look of someone who attends events like this frequently enough to have developed an efficient method for orienting himself within them. Marcus Byrne had been invited by James Hartwell personally. The ClearPath acquisition was in its final negotiating stage, and James had suggested that an informal social encounter might accomplish what another legal meeting could not. Marcus had agreed and come directly from the city, from a ClearPath board call he had taken in the car on the way up. He stood at the edge of the ballroom and looked across it. He found Sarah within 30 seconds. He had always been able to find her in a room, something about the quality of her stillness in the middle of motion, a signal he had learned to read across 11 years of working alongside her. He went still himself for a moment, then he set down his champagne glass on the nearest surface and crossed the room. The distance between where Marcus Byrne started and where Sarah Cole was standing was approximately 60 feet of crowded ballroom. It took him a little over a minute to cover it. In that minute, 3 separate people stopped him to say hello. He was a recognizable figure in the business world, and this was a room full of people who tracked the business world. He managed each greeting with the efficient warmth of someone who has been doing this for years and does not find it difficult, while keeping his eyes on the woman at the far end of the room who was watching him come toward her with the expression she wore when she was amused about something she had not yet decided to share. He reached her. He looked at the cardigan over her arm. He looked at Lily, leaning against Sarah's side with the comfortable, trusting weight of a child who knows exactly where she is safe. He looked back at Sarah's face. He said, in the quiet, direct tone he had always used with her, the tone that did not perform for anyone else in the room, "Sarah Cole, of all the places on earth." She looked at him with the particular expression she had worn in every board meeting he could remember, attentive, warm, and faintly entertained by a situation that was entertaining her for reasons she had not yet chosen to explain. She said, "Marcus." He said, "How long?" She said, 3 years. He said nothing for a moment. He was doing what he always did when he received information that required recalibration, processing it carefully before responding to it. He looked at the ballroom. He looked at the house around them, the estate, the art on the walls, the scale of the whole production. He said, very quietly, so that only she could hear. And the offer? She met his eyes. She said, I am still deciding. He said, the terms are fair, Sarah. James is a serious person. She said, I know the terms are fair. I have read every line of the offer, 3 times. He said, then what are you deciding? She looked across the ballroom to where James Hartwell was standing in conversation near the bar, in the easy posture of a man who does not yet know his evening is about to change. She said, I am deciding whether the terms of a document are the only thing that matters about a decision. James Hartwell noticed Marcus Byrne cross the ballroom to speak to his nanny at approximately the same moment that it happened. He was a man trained by 3 decades of deal-making to notice when the dynamics of a room shifted, and the sight of the public face of his most important acquisition target making a purposeful beeline to speak to a woman in a simple dress near the ballroom entrance registered as a shift he did not yet have a framework for. He excused himself from the conversation he was in and made his way across the room with the deliberate casualness of a man who does not want to appear to be doing what he is doing. He reached Marcus Byrne's side. He shook his hand. He said the things that men say at these events. Glad you came. Good to be away from a conference table. Beautiful evening. Then, as naturally as he could arrange the question, he asked, You know Sarah? Marcus looked at him with an expression that was pleasant and entirely unhelpful. He said, Sarah and I go back quite a long way. James waited. Marcus did not add anything further. He changed the subject to the auction lots in the East Wing. James Hartwell found his wife near the silent auction table at 9:42 and asked her, with a quietness that she recognized immediately as the quietness of someone who is managing something they have not yet fully identified, what she knew about Sarah's professional background, what she had done before the nanny position, where she had come from, what her history was. Victoria looked at him with the faintly baffled expression of a woman who had genuinely never asked these questions and was only now being made aware that they were questions. She said, She is from Ohio. She worked in technology, I believe, before this. She said it in the way you say something that you half remember from a conversation you did not consider important at the time. James said, What kind of technology? Victoria said, I have no idea, James. She is the nanny. She added, Is something wrong? He said, No. Then he said, Can you find out her last name? Victoria looked at him. She said, I know her last name. It is Sarah Cole. He said, Thank you. Then he excused himself and walked back toward the library. Rebecca Marsh had been a technology business journalist for 14 years, and she was at the Hartwell Gala because the event's donor list included enough names from the technology sector to justify an appearance, and because her editor had flagged the Hartwell-Kane pursuit of ClearPath Technologies as a story worth monitoring. She had been trying to identify S.F. Cole for 2 years. It was the most interesting unsolved question in her professional world. An equity holder at the founding level of a nearly $2 billion company who had never appeared in a press photograph, never given a statement to any publication, never been confirmed as present at any industry event. Some of her colleagues had begun to speculate that S. Cole might be a legal structure rather than a living person, a holding entity, a nominee arrangement. Rebecca did not believe this. She believed S. Cole was a person who had made a deliberate and sophisticated choice to remain invisible. That kind of choice left a specific fingerprint. She had been collecting fingerprints for 2 years. She noticed the exchange between Marcus Byrne and the woman in the midnight blue dress from across the room, and something about the quality of it, the directness, the history in it, the way neither of them adjusted their behavior for the social setting around them, registered as significant in the way that things register when you have been looking for something long enough that your pattern recognition has been specifically trained. She watched James Hartwell notice the exchange and cross the room. She watched him speak to Marcus. She watched his expression during the conversation, the managed pleasantness of it, the effort. She opened her phone and typed 3 words into a notes application: Cole, Greenwich, nanny. She did not yet have a confirmed identity. She had a direction. In 14 years of journalism, a confirmed direction had always been enough. At 9:45, Sarah took Lily upstairs. The child was tired in the cooperative way of children who are past the point of fighting sleep. Leaning against Sarah's side in the elevator, moving through the routine of teeth and pajamas and the retrieval of the particular stuffed rabbit, without whom sleep was theoretically impossible, with the automatic ease of someone whose body has already made the decision, even if the mind has not quite caught up. They went through the routine together in the unhurried, practiced way of 3 years of evenings just like this one. Lily, already half asleep, asked as Sarah was pulling the blanket up, "What are you thinking about right now?" It was a question Lily asked regularly, in the moments before sleep, with the unself-conscious curiosity of a child for whom other people's inner lives were genuinely interesting rather than incidental. Sarah considered the question honestly, which was the only way she knew how to answer Lily's questions. She said, "I am thinking about a decision I need to make." Lily considered this from the edge of sleep. She said, "A hard one?" Sarah said, "A significant one. There is a difference." Lily thought about this for a moment, or appeared to, which with Lily was the same thing. She said, "What makes it hard?" Sarah said, "when you cannot know in advance whether you are making it for the right reasons." Lily was quiet long enough that Sarah thought she had fallen asleep. Then she said, "How do you find out?" Sarah said, "You pay attention to everything around the decision until you understand what the decision is actually about." Lily made the small sound of a child filing information away for later. She said, "Is that what you have been doing?" Sarah looked at her in the soft light of the bedside lamp. She said, "Yes, that is exactly what I have been doing." Lily was asleep within 4 minutes. Sarah sat in the chair beside the bed for a while, in the quiet of a room where an 8-year-old slept, in a house whose owner did not know who he had employed. Then she stood, smoothed the blanket, and went back downstairs. In the library off the main hallway, James Hartwell was on his phone, not the browser. He had sent a message at 9:51 to his chief of staff, a woman named Patricia Dawson, who had worked for him for 11 years and who answered messages at any hour because she understood that the work of a private equity firm did not observe regular business hours. The message read, "Need a background check. Sarah Cole, Ohio, likely late 30s to early 40s, technology sector background. Tonight if possible," Patricia replied within 4 minutes with a single word, "On it." James put his phone in his jacket pocket. He straightened his jacket. He went back to the party and smiled at people and raised a glass during the charity remarks and said the right things at the right moments, because James Hartwell had been doing this for 30 years and he could do it with a significant portion of his attention directed elsewhere. His attention was directed at the woman in the midnight blue dress who had reappeared in the ballroom after putting Lily to sleep and was now standing near the terrace doors, talking to Marcus Byrne. On the terrace, Marcus had found Sarah at 10:15, after Lily was asleep and the gala was entering its later, looser phase, the hour when ties come slightly undone and conversations become less performed, and the real business of an evening like this, which is always the business underneath the stated business, begins to surface. He stood beside her looking at the garden below, lit with the amber glow of the estate's outdoor lighting, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. This was not unusual for them. They had worked alongside each other for over a decade and had developed, across that decade, a mutual ease with silence that most partnerships never achieve. Then Marcus said, "He noticed. He went to search your name about 20 minutes ago. Sarah said she knew." He said, "Are you going to tell him?" She looked at the garden. She said, "Not tonight." He said, "The offer is fair, Sarah. You know the numbers better than I do. The firm has the infrastructure to take ClearPath where it needs to go next." She said, "I know the offer is fair. I have read every line of it." He said, "Then what are you waiting for?" She turned to look at him. She said, "I was waiting to finish watching." Marcus was quiet for a long time after she said that. He was processing it in the way she recognized, not retreating from it, but following it to its conclusion. He said, finally, 3 years, Sarah." She said, "Yes." He said, "You took a job in his house." She said, "I needed to see what kind of man he was outside the deal. Anyone can behave well inside a deal. The incentives are clear and the performance is expected. What I needed to see was how he behaved when he believed no one important was in the room." He looked at her. He said, "And what did you find?" She was quiet for a moment. She said, "I found a man who is not dishonest, who treats his family with genuine warmth, who runs a firm that operates with more integrity than most in this space. And I found a man who has blind spots he has never been asked to examine, because the world he has always lived in has never required him to examine them. Marcus said, "Is that disqualifying?" Sarah said, "I have not decided yet." But tonight helped. The photograph had been taken at 7:58 in the evening, 17 minutes after Eleanor Winthrop's arrival, by a woman named Caroline Ashby, who was a peripheral member of Eleanor's social circle and who attended the Hartwell Gala every year, in the capacity of someone who had been invited for long enough that the invitation had become assumed rather than earned. She had been standing near the entrance to the ballroom when Eleanor made her remark about Sarah, and she had photographed the scene, not maliciously, in the way that the word malicious implies a deliberate harm, but in the casual, thoughtless way that people photograph things they find amusing in the moment, without considering what the photograph contains or where it will go. She sent it to a private group of 23 people with the caption, "Spot the help." By 10 o'clock, it had received 14 laugh-react responses and been forwarded twice within the group. It had not yet left the group. That would come later. Rebecca Marsh obtained the photograph at 11:40 through a contact she would not identify in her published story, but whose reliability she had trusted in previous work. By the time she had it on her phone, she also had a name, Sarah Cole, confirmed through a cross-reference she had run from the terrace of the Hartwell estate while ostensibly admiring the garden lighting. The cross-reference had taken 22 minutes and had required access to 3 databases she maintained subscriptions to for exactly this kind of work. The result had appeared on her screen with the quality of something that had been hiding in plain sight all along, which was, she would later write in her published account of the evening, the most reliable sign that you have found the right answer. She looked at the result for a long time. Then she put her phone in her bag and went back inside to collect her coat. She had a story, she had a photograph, she had a name, she had work to do. Patricia Dawson's background check came through at 11:04. It was thorough in the way that reports produced by people who have been doing something for a long time are thorough, not exhaustive in every direction, but precise in the directions that mattered. It confirmed, Sarah Cole, born Columbus, Ohio, 1982, computer science, Ohio State University, 2004, moved to San Francisco, 2005, listed on ClearPath Technologies, Inc., founding documents, incorporated 2006, alongside Marcus Allen Byrne, equity position, 22.4% of outstanding shares. Board designation, founding shareholder with veto rights over acquisitions exceeding $50 million per the original shareholders agreement, Section 7.3, executed September 2005. No public photographs on record associated with the company. No media appearances. Correspondence address maintained at a P.O. box in Columbus, Ohio. At the very bottom of the report, Patricia had added a note in the flat, careful language she used when she was conveying something she understood to be significant. Current employer listed in annual Columbus City filing, Hartwell household, Greenwich, Connecticut. Live-in domestic position, 3 years. James Hartwell read the report in the library of his own house. He read it once, from beginning to end. He read it again, more slowly, with the specific attention of someone who is checking whether they have understood it correctly and hoping, on some level, that a second reading will produce a different conclusion. It did not produce a different conclusion. He put his phone face down on the desk and sat in the leather chair behind the library desk, with both hands flat on the surface in front of him, and did not move for 6 minutes. This is established because the library had a security camera that recorded the corridor and the partial interior, and the footage of those 6 minutes would later be reviewed by people with a professional interest in the timeline of that evening. What the camera recorded was a man sitting very still, while the understanding of something large and significant settled into its full dimensions inside him. The party continued on the other side of the library door. He could hear it. He did not go back to it for a long time. He came out of the library at 11:18 and found Victoria in the entrance hall. He said he needed to speak with Sarah. Victoria looked at him with the expression she wore when James was doing something she did not yet understand, but recognized as serious. She said, "Is everything all right?" He said, "Yes." He said it in the way that people say yes when the honest answer is considerably more complicated than yes, but the complication is not one they are ready to share yet. He walked through the entrance hall and the corridor beyond it, and found Sarah standing near the staircase at 11:20, having just confirmed with one of the household staff that Lily was still asleep. She was standing with the quiet, patient bearing of someone who has been waiting, not impatiently, for something to arrive. He stopped in front of her. He said, "I need to talk with you." She looked at him with the expression she had worn in every significant professional conversation of her adult life. Attentive, neutral, entirely composed. She said, "All right." He said, "I know who you are." She said, "I know you do." He said, "You are S. Cole." She said, "Yes." He said, "You co-founded ClearPath Technologies." She said, "Yes." He said, "You have a 22% equity stake and veto rights over acquisitions above $50 million." She said, 22.4%. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment, processing the economy of her answers. The complete absence of defensiveness or apology, the simple acknowledgement of facts as facts. He said, "How long have you known about our acquisition offer?" She said, "Since the first letter, 8 months ago." He said, "You received the letters." She said, "I received all 3 of them." He said, "You did not respond." She said, "No." He said, "Why?" She looked at him steadily. She said, "Because I was not ready to respond." He said, "Not ready in what sense?" She said, "In the sense that I did not yet have the information I needed to respond accurately." He said, "What information did you need?" She said, "The information I have been gathering for 3 years." He absorbed this. He said, "You have been in my house." She said, "I work for you." "I have been for 3 years." He said, "You have been at my dinner table." She said, "Most evenings, yes." He said, "You have heard me talk about the acquisition." She said, "Many times." He said, "You have heard me talk about S. Cole." She said, "Several times." He said, "What did you hear me say?" She was quiet for a moment, not because she was uncertain, but because she was choosing her words with the precision she brought to everything. She said, "I heard you say that you were beginning to wonder if S. Cole was even still alive." She paused. She said, "I was in the kitchen when you said that." He looked at her. He said, "I see." She said, "You also said, on another occasion, that S. Cole was the most infuriating variable in the most important deal your firm had ever pursued." He said, "That is accurate." She said, "I know." He said, "Why?" Not accusatorially. He had moved past that quickly enough, which was, she would note later, one of the things the 3 years had taught her about him. He asked it the way he asked everything that he genuinely did not yet understand, directly and with the expectation of a direct answer. She said, "Because I needed to know what kind of person you were before I decided what to do with what you were offering. I needed to see how you handled the people around you when you believed the stakes of those interactions were low. I needed to see how you spoke about people who were not in the room. I needed to see how you made decisions under pressure, how you treated your family, how you treated the people who worked for you when you had no particular incentive to treat them well." He said, "And the acquisition terms themselves?" She said, "I read the terms 8 months ago. The terms are fair. The terms were never the question." He said, "Then what was?" She looked at him with the steady, clear gaze she had used all her adult life when she was saying something she needed the other person to understand completely. She said, "The question was whether to give the company I built to someone whose character I understood well enough to trust with it." He said, "And your conclusion?" She said, "I watched Eleanor Winthrop walk through your front door tonight and say something dismissive to me in front of witnesses, and I watched your wife respond with a laugh rather than a word of correction, and I watched 23 people in a private message thread find it funny. And then I stood on your terrace and looked at your garden and thought about what that told me, not about your acquisition offer, which is separate, but about the world that offer was coming from." He was quiet. He said, "What did it tell you?" She said, "That the people in your world have very clear ideas about who matters and who does not, and that those ideas run deep enough that they operate without examination, even in people who consider themselves decent." He said, "Including me." She said, "You did not make the remark, James. But you have never required the people around you to reconsider the assumptions underneath the remarks they make either. That is a different kind of responsibility." He was quiet for a long time after she said that. Then he said, "And the deal?" She said, "I have not told you my decision yet." He said, What would help you make it? She looked at him, at his face in the corridor, the party audible behind them, the house around them that had been their shared domestic space for 3 years, and was now, in this hallway, a very different kind of room. She said, I want to meet with your full partnership team. Not as your nanny, as Sarah Cole, founding equity holder and board member of ClearPath Technologies, represented by counsel. I want the meeting scheduled in your conference room in Greenwich, and I want every person who will have operational responsibility for ClearPath after the acquisition in that room. He said, When? She said, 2 weeks. He said, 2 weeks. He repeated it not as a question, but as a man adjusting to a timeline he had not set. Then he said, I will have Patricia arrange it. She said, Good. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she said, James. He said, Yes. She said, Tonight helped. He said, Did it help in the direction of yes or the direction of no? She said, Both, actually. She said it without irony. Then she said good night and walked back toward the kitchen, and the sound of her footsteps on the corridor floor was the only thing moving in a house that, 30 minutes from now, would have no idea what it was about to become. Over 3 years, Sarah Cole had sat in the margin of the Hartwell household and paid attention in the particular way of someone who has spent her career building systems, looking for patterns, cataloging data points, distinguishing between the performance of a quality and the actual presence of it. She had watched James Hartwell handle a deal falling apart at midnight, pacing the kitchen on the phone with a composure that did not involve cruelty toward the people on the other end of the call. She had watched him tell his older daughter, home from college for a weekend, that he was proud of her in a way that was specific rather than general, referencing a particular thing she had done, a particular quality he had noticed. She had watched him fire a groundskeeper once, for reasons that were legitimate, and do it in the direct and humane way of someone who understands that delivering a difficult message well is part of the responsibility of delivering it at all. She had also watched him be oblivious in ways that were instructive rather than disqualifying. He did not notice when the household staff were having a difficult week, unless the difficulty manifested as a problem with the service. He did not ask questions about the people around him who were not positioned in his direct professional or personal field of view. He moved through the domestic world of his own home with the comfortable unawareness of a man who had never been required to notice it, because the domestic world of his home had always been managed by someone else, first by staff he hired before Victoria, then by Victoria, and now by both. These were not crimes. They were the specific shapings of a life lived without the friction of ever having to consider how the other half of any given situation felt. They were things that could be changed, Sarah had concluded, by the right kind of pressure from the right kind of source. She intended to be that source. What she had observed about Victoria was simpler and, in some ways, more painful to have observed. Victoria was a woman who had absorbed the social categories of her upbringing so thoroughly that they had become invisible to her, not as malice but as atmosphere, the way people absorb the assumptions of the world they grow up in without understanding that the assumptions are assumptions rather than facts. She had been warm to Sarah in the specific way of someone who is warm to the people who work for her in a way that does not require her to actually know them. She had said, many times, that she could not imagine managing without Sarah, which was true in a practical sense and entirely missing the point. She had never asked Sarah Cole a single question about her life before the Hartwell house. Not once, across 3 years. Sarah had considered this carefully and decided that it was not cruelty. It was a failure of imagination so complete that it had rendered the question unthinkable. That, too, was something she intended to address. The story ran 6 weeks after the gala in a publication whose technology business coverage Sarah had read for years. The headline was, "The Nanny in the Room, How ClearPath's anonymous co-founder S. Cole spent 3 years inside the home of the firm pursuing her company's acquisition." Rebecca Marsh had it precisely right. The founding history of ClearPath, the equity structure, the P.O. box in Columbus, the 3 years in the Hartwell house, the acquisition offer sitting unanswered, the gala, and the photograph. She had a careful, confirmed statement from Marcus Burns' communications team that acknowledged Sarah Cole's identity without elaborating further. She did not have a statement from Sarah herself. She had requested 1 through 3 separate channels. Sarah had not responded, which Rebecca Marsh noted in her story, with the understated observation that S. Cole's relationship with public communication remained, even now, entirely consistent with her established pattern. The story was picked up by every major business publication within 48 hours. The photograph ran in every piece. The same photograph that had been captioned, "Spot the help," in a private group message, and had seemed, in that context, a casual joke shared among people who considered themselves harmless. In this new context, stripped of its original caption and reframed by the full weight of what Rebecca Marsh had reported, it became something entirely different. It became the image of a $1.9 billion tech founder standing at the edge of a ballroom in a simple dress, holding a child's cardigan, watching a room full of people who had no idea who she was. The contrast between what the room saw and what was actually there, that gap, that enormous and self-indicting gap, was what made the photograph travel. It asked a question that people recognized because they had all, at some point, been in a version of that room. The question was, who else have you dismissed without looking? The 23 people who had received the original message in the private group were not publicly identified by Rebecca Marsh, who had made a deliberate editorial decision not to name them on the grounds that the photograph's broader meaning was more important than any individual accounting. They did not need to be named. The people who had received the message knew who they were. Several of them, in the weeks following the story's publication, would try to reach Sarah Cole through various intermediaries, some with apologies, some with expressions of admiration that were difficult to distinguish from the kind of apology that is really about the apologizer's discomfort rather than the person who was wronged. Sarah Cole did not respond to any of these outreaches. She did not respond to them because they were, as she told Marcus in a phone call during this period, beside the point. The point was not what any individual person in that room thought of her. The point was what the story made visible about the assumptions embedded in rooms like that one. That was the story Rebecca Marsh had told. Sarah was satisfied with it. 2 weeks after the gala, on a Tuesday morning in late October, Sarah Cole walked into the Hartwell Kane private equity conference room in downtown Greenwich for the first time as herself. She wore a well-tailored dark suit she had owned for years and pulled from the back of the closet in the room at the Hartwell estate, where she had been living for 3 years. She carried a briefcase that belonged to her and that she had collected from a storage unit in Columbus on a trip she made the previous weekend, without telling anyone where she was going or why. She was represented by a law firm that James Hartwell's partners recognized immediately as one of the 3 most respected technology M&A practices in the country. She sat down across the conference table from James, his 4 senior partners, and their legal team, and she said, "I have reviewed the acquisition terms. I have some amendments I would like to discuss." The room was quiet in the specific way of rooms that have had their expectations adjusted without warning. The meeting lasted 4 hours and 20 minutes. Sarah's amendments were 7 in total. They addressed employee protections, retention guarantees for ClearPath's engineering and product teams, with specific provisions against layoffs in the first 36 months post-acquisition. They addressed the company's product roadmap, which Sarah had been monitoring from the kitchen table of the Hartwell house with the same attention she had given it when she was sitting in product meetings, and which she believed was at a critical inflection point that required operational continuity rather than the restructuring that private acquisitions typically imposed. They addressed charitable commitments, specifically a requirement that 2% of the acquisition proceeds be directed to a foundation whose purpose she specified in detail. And they addressed her own ongoing advisory role, not operational, not ceremonial, but structural, a seat at the table for specific categories of decision for a period of 5 years post-close. Every amendment was specific, well-reasoned, and grounded in a knowledge of the company and the deal that was considerably more complete than anything James Hartwell's team had expected to encounter across the table. 3 of the 7 amendments were accepted without significant counter-argument. 2 were accepted with minor modifications that Sarah's counsel reviewed and approved within the meeting. 1 was negotiated across 90 minutes of back and forth that Sarah and James conducted directly, without the lawyers, in the particular register of 2 people who have been in the same house for 3 years and have developed a working understanding of how the other one thinks. The 7th Amendment, the charitable provision, was not negotiated at all. Sarah said, "This is not negotiable." The room looked at her. James said, "We can discuss the structure." She said, "The structure I have described is the structure." He looked at it for a moment. He said, "All right." The deal closed 6 weeks later at $347 million, $7 million above the original offer, reflecting the amendments Sarah had negotiated and the revised valuation that her legal team had successfully argued was supported by ClearPath's most recent metrics. Sarah Cole's share of the ClearPath acquisition proceeds, after taxes and legal fees and the commitments she had structured into the deal, came to approximately $77 million. She established the Cole Foundation for Computer Science Education, not the Cole Hartwell Foundation, as James had suggested, despite his offer being genuine and his argument for it being reasonable. She thanked him for the offer and declined it. She wanted the foundation to carry one name, her mother's, effectively, since the Cole in question was not only her own, but Margaret Cole's, whose name was on the library card that had allowed a 12-year-old to check out the only programming book in the Columbus County system 3 times in a row. The foundation's inaugural grant was $14 million, directed to computer science education programs in underfunded public schools across Ohio, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and 4 other states. The inaugural board included Marcus Byrne, Patricia Dawson, and a Columbus school librarian who had been Margaret Cole's closest colleague and who accepted the board seat with the particular, quiet dignity of someone who has spent 30 years believing that the things that happen in libraries matter and has been waiting, without impatience, for evidence. The foundation's first grant recipient in the Columbus School District was the Parsons Avenue Elementary School, a different building now than the one Sarah had attended, having been rebuilt in 2011, but on the same street and in the same neighborhood, and served by the same branch of the Columbus Metropolitan Library, where Margaret Cole had ordered a programming book in 1994 because her daughter kept asking for it. The grant funded a computer science curriculum and equipment upgrade that reached 412 students in its first year. Sarah attended the program launch. She did not give a speech. She walked through the computer lab and stopped at a desk where a girl of about 12 was working through an introductory coding exercise with the focused, private intensity that Sarah recognized the way you recognize something that has always been part of your own life. She stood beside the desk for a moment. The girl looked up. Sarah said, "What are you building?" The girl said, "I am not sure yet. I am still figuring out how the pieces work." Sarah said, "That is exactly the right place to start." Victoria called Sarah 4 days after the story ran. Sarah answered on the 3rd attempt, not because she was avoiding the call, but because she was in the middle of something and did not reach her phone in time on the first 2. The conversation lasted 14 minutes. Victoria said things that were sincere and things that were less entirely sincere, and Sarah, who had spent 3 years in close proximity to Victoria and had developed a reasonably accurate understanding of which was which, received all of it without either warmth or coldness, with the attentive neutrality she brought to information that was being given to her for the first time. Victoria said, "I want you to know that what Eleanor said at the gala, I should have said something. That is on me." Sarah said, "Yes, it is." There was a pause. Victoria said, "I did not know." Sarah said, "You did not ask." There was another pause, longer this time, in which Victoria Hartwell was, Sarah believed, genuinely sitting with the distinction between those two things. Then Victoria said, "Will you stay in Lily's life?" Sarah said, "If Lily wants that." Victoria said, "She does." She said it immediately, without hesitation, in the tone of a woman stating a fact she has known for a long time. On a Saturday morning 3 weeks after the conference room meeting, Sarah came to the Hartwell house and took Lily to the park. They walked for an hour along the paths that Lily had always preferred because they ran alongside the small creek that, in October, was moving fast and clear over the stones. Lily had been told about the situation in the age-appropriate terms that Victoria had managed carefully, that Sarah was an important business person who had also been their nanny for 3 years, and that both things were true at the same time, and that this was unusual but not confusing if you thought about it correctly. Lily had thought about it correctly, in the way she thought about most things, and had arrived at a question she had been saving for the walk. She said, "Did you always know you were going to stay as long as you did?" Sarah thought about this with the honesty that Lily's questions always required of her. She said, I knew I was going to stay until I understood what I needed to understand. It took longer than I expected. Lily said, "Because of me?" Sarah looked at her. She said, "Because of you, mostly." Yes. Lily walked beside her for a while without speaking, in the comfortable way of a child who is processing something rather than performing a reaction to it. Then she said, "Are you going to come back?" Sarah said, "Not to live here, but I am going to stay in your life if you want that." Lily said, "I want that." She said it in the simple, unequivocal way she had of saying things that were true, without hesitation, without qualification, without the performed certainty that adults sometimes bring to statements they are less certain of than they want to appear. Sarah put her hand briefly on Lily's shoulder, the same gesture she had used 1,000 times across 3 years, at school drop-offs, at homework tables, at the edge of sleep. And it felt, in this context, exactly the same as it always had. It was not complicated. Some things were not complicated, and this was one of them. The creek moved fast over the stones beside the path. October light came through the trees, at the angle it always comes through trees in October in Connecticut, which is the angle that makes everything look like it has been here forever and is worth the looking at. The photograph that had been captioned, "Spot the Help" in a private group message on the evening of October 14th, ran on the cover of a business magazine 4 months later, in connection with the first published profile of Sarah Cole, the first she had ever agreed to, granted to Rebecca Marsh on terms that Sarah set and that Rebecca accepted because she understood that this was how the story was going to be told, and that Sarah Cole's terms were both fair and interesting. The cover caption read, "Sarah Cole, founder." The image was the same one taken by Caroline Ashby's phone in the Hartwell ballroom. The midnight blue dress, the white cardigan over the arm. The expression that does not know it is being photographed. But the context in which it now existed was so entirely different from the context of its origin that it was, in every way that mattered, a different photograph. People who had first seen it in a private group message with a mocking caption saw it again on a magazine cover in an airport newsstand or a doctor's waiting room or a bookstore display and had the experience that the story was intended to produce, the understanding that the category they had assigned to the image, on first viewing, had been entirely wrong, and that the wrongness had not been in the image. In the profile, Rebecca Marsh asked Sarah the question that every reader of the story wanted answered. Why the nanny position? Why 3 years? Why stay anonymous through all of it? Sarah was quiet for a long time before she answered, in the way of someone who has thought about a question carefully and is now choosing the words that most accurately represent the answer she has arrived at. She said, "I needed to understand whether I was building something for the right reasons, not the financial reasons, those were settled, but the actual purpose of it, what ClearPath was for, and I could not see that from inside the industry, where I was supposed to be a certain kind of person, with a certain kind of story. I needed to see what the world looked like from outside that story. I needed to see how things worked when I was not supposed to matter," Rebecca said. "And what did you find?" Sarah said. "I found that the world treats people the way it expects to be allowed to, and that the most revealing question you can ask about anyone, about a person or an institution or a culture, is not what they do when they know they are being observed. It is what they do when they believe no one who matters is in the room." She paused. She looked at her hands. She said, "I was always in the room." That was the line that ran at the top of Rebecca Marsh's story. It was the line that was shared most frequently when the story circulated, more than any detail of the acquisition, more than any fact about the company, more than any description of what had happened at the gala. It was shared because it said something that the people who shared it recognized as being about more than Sarah Cole. It was about the nature of dismissal, the assumption that a person who has been categorized as not mattering has, in consequence, ceased to pay attention, ceased to think, ceased to accumulate the information that attentive people always accumulate. It was about the cost of that assumption, and it was about the fact that the people who pay that cost are rarely the ones who had the power to reconsider the assumption before it became expensive. Eleanor Winthrop had made a remark. 23 people had found it funny. They had not known who was in the room. Now they did. Sarah Cole did not give a second interview. She did not attend industry events in the months following the publication of the profile. She did not, in the manner of someone who has been given a platform by an unexpected set of circumstances, used the platform to build a public presence she had spent 12 years deliberately avoiding. She did what she had always done. She directed her attention toward the things that mattered to her and allowed the rest to exist without her participation in it. She sat on the foundation's board. She maintained the advisory role she had negotiated into the ClearPath acquisition. She returned to Columbus in the spring and spent 2 months in the house on Devonshire Road with Gerald, who was 74 now and who had read every piece of coverage about his daughter with the composed, unsurprised pride of a man who had always known what was in her and had simply been waiting for the world to catch up to what he knew. She told Marcus, in a phone call she made from the back porch of the Devonshire Road house on a warm April evening, that she thought she might want to build something new. Not ClearPath. ClearPath was done, as it should be, its work complete, and its future in hands she had evaluated and found adequate. Something different. Something smaller, at first. Something in education, probably, because the foundation's work had reminded her of what the original question had been. The question that had sent her to the Parsons Avenue Library as a 12-year-old, and to Ohio State, and to San Francisco, and through 11 years of building something that worked, and 3 years of watching from the margin of a house in Greenwich, and into a conference room on a Tuesday in October, to negotiate the terms of handing it over. The question was, what should software actually be for? She still had an answer. She was starting to think about the next version of it. Marcus said, "Let me know when you are ready." She said, "I know where to find you." She said it, and they were both quiet for a moment, in the comfortable way of people who have worked alongside each other for a long time and understand that comfortable silences are a form of communication too. So the question I want to leave you with, and I mean this as a genuine question, not a rhetorical one, is this. Have you ever been in a room where you were completely underestimated? Where someone looked at you and saw only the category they had assigned to you and never once thought to look further? And if you have been in that room, and most of us have been, in one form or another, at some point in our lives, what did you do with it? Did you correct the record immediately, the way most people expect you to? Did you walk away from the situation entirely? Or did you do something else? Something more considered? Something that used the underestimation as information rather than treating it as an injury? Leave your answer in the comments below. This channel exists because of the conversations in the comments section, and I read every single response. I want to know what you would have done. I want to know what you did do. Before we go, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Next week on Tales of Whisper, we are going to tell you about a woman who was the quietest person at every board meeting for 6 years. She never argued, she never pushed back, she never asked for credit. Her colleagues assumed she was there to take notes, because quiet women in rooms full of loud men are almost always assumed to be taking notes. What they did not know, what none of them had thought to investigate, was that she had been buying the company 1 share at a time, across 6 years, with the patience of someone who understood that the most significant acquisitions are the ones that happen before anyone realizes an acquisition is underway. The morning she walked into that boardroom and told them what she owned, nobody in that room said a word for a very long time. Subscribe to Tales of Whisper. New stories every week. Stories about the people the room got wrong, and what happened when they found out.